Well, I wanted to talk about uh, some saintly French women uh, that I've been thinking about at night, the last few nights before going to sleep. I've had this in mind maybe for a while. I was I read the Magnificat prayer book and the Mass readings. I subscribe to it. It's richer, I think, than the other one. That it's more progressive, which I don't mind. But a diet of all contemporary progressives is not as rich to me as the whole sort of spectrum. Even though they lean sometimes, they like to stick in very conservative writings, etc. But it's, I think, directed by the Dominicans. Sebastian White, I think, is a convert to Catholicism, and it's a very well done book. And the other morning, I was in church early in the morning. I read my lauds, my morning prayer, and then I like to look at the mass readings to prepare for the mass readings. And then I saw this meditation of the day, and it said, "Living the truth of God's love," which sounds almost like a papal title or something. But I had this premonition that I was in for a surprise. And since I typically look at the back to see, who wrote the hymn, for example, or perhaps the source from which a saint's meditation is taken, I had noticed that this month too, Elizabeth of the Trinity was included. And even though from looking at this meditation and living the truth of God's love and the kingdom of God is within you and these Bible citations, etc., would not normally lead me to think of Elizabeth of the Trinity, maybe something from Paul in Ephesians or something, I had the premonition that it was going to be Elizabeth of the Trinity. And in fact, it was. And when I saw that, it really surprised me. And so I want to share with you to begin with what this meditation says. And I've looked it up in the complete works in French that I have and have read and probably will reread. And I think they've taken this from different parts of Elizabeth's writings. And this is really, in a nutshell, the teaching and contribution of Elizabeth of the Trinity. The kingdom of God is within you, and while God has invited us to remain in Him, He now reveals that we don't have to go out of ourselves to find Him, which is interesting because Elizabeth is, I think, famous for saying we have to leave ourselves and our preoccupations and our over sensitivities, which she had struggled with, by going out of ourselves and being with God. But this is kind of interesting. The indwelling of the Trinity, of course, is her main teaching. So the Master once more expresses his desire to dwell in us. If anyone loves me, he will keep my word, and my Father will love him, and we will come to him and make our home in him, which was her whole spirituality, the indwelling of the Trinity. If anyone loves me, it is love that attracts, that draws God to his creatures, not a sensible love, but that love strong as death, that deep waters cannot quench. So that she, I think, early on discovered the essentiality of love in a very sublime and profound way, and lived it and began to live it. By the way, this meditation was presented on the 132nd anniversary of Elizabeth of the Trinity's First Communion at age 10. And on the occasion of her First Communion at age 10, as I recall from my readings, she had that conversion, sort of parallel to Thérèse of Lisieux's conversion, where her temper tantrums and oversensitive reactions to things stopped like suddenly. So in my Facebook, I was seeing that they were posting something about her First Communion, her anniversary, 1891. And then I had never thought of it before. I joined the Elizabeth of the Trinity group, in French group, I guess, and then the researches on Elizabeth of the Trinity, another French group, and I got into that whole thing. So this was a lot of coincidences going on right now. So because I love my Father, I always do the things that are pleasing to Him. So this love, which is not it's not a feeling lovey for God. It's like a determination of the will, a voluntary love, if you will, that does not depend, we'll see this later on in this meditation, does not depend on our changing feelings and impressions and things like that. It is strong as death. Thus spoke our Holy Master, and every soul that wants to live close to Him must also live this maxim. The divine good pleasure must be its food, its daily bread. Interesting, because we're going to see that she couldn't eat for much of the last year and a half of her life or so with Addison's disease. We've talked about it before. I'll talk about it more. It must let itself be immolated by all the Father's wishes in the likeness of His adored Christ. That's very profound. The need to be immolated, sacrificed, like a whole burnt offering, which, by the way, she was on fire from thirst by not being able to swallow water, maybe suck on a very little ice. And she said that the first thing she would say when she got to heaven, or enjoy when she got to heaven, would be a glass of cold water. And by the way, I've read her letters and everything. There has never been a saint that I have read who was more eagerly anticipating going to heaven and so convinced about heaven than Elizabeth of the Trinity. It was like she was in the waiting room and she knew that doctor, whoever it was waiting. She still had to wait, but she was completely sure. And the Father's wish, he crushed him, etc. in Isaiah 53. It was the good pleasure of the Lord, the Ratzon of Yahweh, to crush him with sickness, or He made him sick. It's a very difficult text. It pleased Yahweh to crush him with pains. Very difficult text in various ways. Each incident, this is what then brought into focus and put together everything that I had been hearing about her for many, many years and reading about her. Each incident each event, each suffering, as well as each joy, is a sacrament which gives God to it. So the sacraments, these manifestations of God, which are graces and that help make us holy, not just the seven sacraments or some other, paraliturgical graces, but everything that happens to us that God allows is a sacrament God is giving to us. So the soul no longer makes a distinction between these things. You don't say, I like this sacrament, I don't like this other sacrament. It surmounts them, rises above them. That's one of the things the Carmelite priest told me in 1992 before I joined the Carmelites, or 1991 actually. She sat like a queen above all these sufferings and inconveniences and hardships and everything. And she went through a lot. And she died at 26 from Addison's. It goes beyond them to rest in its master. And notice how many times this maître, master, is also could be teacher in French. Above all things, it surmounts them. It exalts him. It exalts him. I've got to find the right one here. So I'm going to have to go to the, it exalts him high on the mountain of its heart. Yes, higher than his gifts, his consolation, higher than the sweetness that descends from him. So you're not looking, this is the true religion that I've spoken about in many videos. It's not, what can God give me and how do I, I join this to my jogging, my macrobiotic diet, my transcendental meditation, whatever, to feel good. I use God as a tool that helps me and my project as I, with great intentions, want to fulfill. The property of love is never to seek self, to keep back nothing. I always talk about these compartments that God is not allowed in there, my bank account or some other cubby hole that is mine. St. John of the Cross. Blessed the soul that loves in truth. The Lord has become its captive through love. So the way to keep God in you is through love. So that I thought that was so interesting. And I was going to give another introduction to this, but I might as well continue with Elizabeth a little bit more for the continuity of this. This is the photo of Elizabeth of the Trinity that I saw in Mexico as a Dominican novice in 1973. It would have been August or September or maybe October, maybe even November. It could have been the anniversary of her death, November 9th. And someone showed me this photo, Miguel Ángel Bocanegra, may he rest in peace, I think he died, and said to me, because I was already devoted to Thérèse of Lisieux, he said, she is more mystical than Thérèse of Lisieux. As I would later tell a fellow Dominican that Catherine of Siena was more mystical than Teresa of Avila, which we're going to talk about a little bit in a second, Catherine of Siena in a little bit. So I saw this picture. Obviously, she's attractive. Obviously, it's an incredible picture. And just recently, did I reread how this picture came about. I'm rereading a book by a very cool kind of, I guess he's old, very old now, but he's probably not dead. He's not that old. Uh, the son of a director, movie director. He himself is a script writer, very sort of worldly connected guy, but he wrote on Elizabeth a long time ago and then wrote more recently this book, maybe 20 years ago now. That's what's more recently for me. Elizabeth Kate, that's her name, or The Obsession of God, being obsessed with God. And I just happened to have gone over this for the second time, which is when you really start getting things. And it says that, and if I can get everything right from the French, a month before her death, I knew it was maybe her last photo. I just didn't know some of the details he has here. Mother Germaine, that was the prioress, very close and very loving relationship between Elizabeth and Mother Germaine. You know, took out that box they used for taking those cameras back in 1906, which is the year Elizabeth died, that were used in the Dijon Carmel to photograph the sisters when they made profession. The prioress guesses, intuits, that these days of leaves turning reddish, autumn leaves and gray skies. This is October. Are the last that the one that she called her little saint would pass on the earth. She is helped to get dressed. Actually, the author is dialogue telling this to Elizabeth. You are helped to dress. You are held up until the terrace and seated on an armchair, and a plant is placed next to you, and a statue of Our Lady of Lourdes on a pedestal 3 feet high, and you are given a pretty rosary that you love, and your book of St. John of the Cross. So that answers the mystery that I had for a while there. What book does she have? And I knew the rosary was very interesting, and I kind of been looking for something like that, but I did get her crucifix, not the same size. Hers is larger, but I still was able to buy a profession crucifix online. I paid a pretty penny for it, about $150. Maybe fake bidding was taking place on eBay or whatever it was. I mean, it was $1 more every time. I don't know if that's part of the program or what. Anyway, so we know now what book it is. And your look, Elizabeth, your gaze, that immense gaze, the immense regard, is turned to what is far away. It is of such an intense fixation. Keep your eyes fixed on Jesus, as chapter 12 of Hebrews, that the 4 seconds of posing, which are necessary to make the impression on the plate, 13/18, some sort of photographic term, are insufficient to explain it. So this great writer has explained or has described what we see when we look at this photo of Elizabeth, which I think is her last photo. There may have been a deathbed one that I know about, but certainly this is probably one of her last posed photo for sure. In fact, I don't think there's that many posed photos. This is a picture of her crucifix. I bought this in the Dijon convent, which is in the outskirts of Dijon, Flavigneau. And it says, you know, take your crucifix, regarde, écoute, and look and listen. And there's a description in the complete works of the size of the crucifix and the weight and everything. And I compared mine to hers, and hers is larger cross than I have. So I wanted to talk about these 4 French women that I call saintly. Of course, Bernadette, Thérèse, and Elizabeth have been canonized. The 4th is Simone Weil. Simone Weil. I don't think I have a Simone Weil real handy, but I can find it. And I wanted to talk about these 4 saints because I consider them to be like almost like my friends that accompany me. I know that, you know, in English we would probably say Simone Weil, but I believe in French it's Simone Weil. And I was trying to look for the famous photo of hers where she, you know, looks very cool and Jewish. I think that's one of the photos. I wanted to talk about these 4 saints, and I was also thinking of 4 Italian saints that I also like. So there's 4 and 4. I did a video on my favorite saints, and the 4 Italian saints would be Catherine of Siena, the Mama, whose feast is coming up the 29th of April. And then, you know, you have Saint Clare, because of, you know, and with Saint Francis, etc., and then Saint Rita, and then Francesca Romana. And I spoke about these saints in my video on my favorite saints. But Catherine looms higher than all the saints in her doctrine, all the women saints for sure. And I'm not going to talk about Catherine too much, but it's interesting that I have 4 Italian women favorite saints, and I have 4 French women, saintly women favorites. And so I wanted to speak about this. And of course, we would start with Bernadette, who I was thinking about it last night. Bernadette is in a class by herself, as Catherine is, for different reasons, because Bernadette was almost like a nothing in a way. She was like the perfect canvas for the Virgin to paint on. Bernadette was ignorant and bad memory and everything. But she was favored with an incredible series of visions of Our Lady of Lourdes, coupled with the discovery of the spring and the healings that I've read a lot about over many, many years. And then, of course, her incorrupt body. So she's in a class by herself, being the least endowed, so to speak, of these four French women saints that I love. So the littlest one was the most favored one because that's the way things work. Here's a picture of her arrival in Nevers, where I've been there twice. I've been to Lourdes twice. I think we already saw this one. It's not too large. So Bernadette is one of my sort of constant companions, along with Thérèse of Lisieux, that I've spoken about before. Thérèse had some education. She wrote her story of a soul, which became a super bestseller. I have a 1913 copy, which is actually about a year probably earlier than the one used in the process of her beatification. So that's a gem that I was able to get. But she is famous for this giant steps after her conversion at Christmas when she's 14 years old, I guess. She embarked on a course with giant steps. Died at 24, doctor of the church. Only 3 women are doctors of the church. Omen novum, a new omen, sign, portent. Along with Charles de Foucault, this universal brother, also French, went to the Muslims in the Sahara without blabbing a word, just living by example, something very needed today. This photo was taken June 9th, 1999. I took it in Lisieux, outside the Basilica. I was there when she became a doctor of the church. So I want to show you some of my pictures then. I had good seats, and I had a lot of known Carmelites around me and Jesuits. And I think I've seen this before. I think I've shown this sometime. Well, this is the grave, the tomb of Thérèse and her, sister Agnes and her sister Marie and Celine, her dear sister, 4 years older. And I was very impressed in Lisieux by the plaques, whatever you call these, acknowledgments of gratitude. Look at the dates: 1920, Peru, different places, India, Santiago de Chile, all these places where, and especially soldiers in World War I. I have a whole book on what soldiers wrote about Thérèse, in their experience of World War I. Nous les Poilus, if I pronounce it correctly. In fact, I can probably show you the book. Nous les Poilus, plus fort que l'acier, stronger than steel. Letters from the trenches to Thérèse of Lisieux. So, these are the paradoxes of God, where, a little person, they don't know what to write about her in the obituary in the Carmel. She apparently did nothing for 9 years entered when she was 15 and just dies in suffering from tuberculosis that corrupts the whole body. And I say it very crudely, from the throat to the anus. This is a picture of the postcard put on my breakfast plate in Mexico in the ex hacienda of Tultenango, probably around July 16 or 17, 1973, by Father Weil, who already knew that I loved Thérèse of Lisieux. And for my breakfast, that when I show up for breakfast in the little refectory in this postulancy, I see this beautiful postcard of Thérèse of Lisieux. We've spoken about Elizabeth of the Trinity some, and again, you have, and I saw an excellent video on YouTube. I wish I could do them like that. Father, I forget his name, young man, I forget his name, Daniel or Kevin, or maybe Kevin introduced him. Series in Boston College. They did a series of Carmelite saints. And the offices occupied by Elizabeth were very minor. She was like in charge of getting the messages that were delivered to the rotating thing there, where they come and deliver a message to the the convent. Thérèse of Lisieux at least was assistant mistress of novices and assistant sacristan, as I recall. Certainly assistant mistress of novices. I don't think she ever became sacristan, assistant. But Elizabeth was Elizabeth was a fantastic pianist. But she lived that hidden life in the Dijon convent. She came from a poorer family than Thérèse. And she was very popular and very placid and very friendly, very loving. Total transformation of what was a petulant, temper tantrum prone little girl. I told you that my father was devoted to Thérèse. He met Celine. Her sisters lived on into the 1940s and 50s. Even after I was born, they were, at least Celine, I think, was still alive. 1959, she died. And my father had this, unusual picture of Thérèse. My father dies in 1976. This was very famous in his little office in the house. It disappeared for 30 years. And then my brother's first wife found it in the garage. So I have her and Bernadette over my bed, but I don't have the picture of the one of Bernadette that I bought online over my bed. So we talked a little bit about Elizabeth of the Trinity, and I wanted to also mention this before I forget and go on to Simone Weil. Elizabeth of the Trinity loved a saying of Angela da Foligno. This is an early Franciscan tertiary mystic, crazy woman in many ways, very sexual at first, and even in her spirituality, she kind of mixed in sort of sensual kinds of images, etc., in a very profound way. And I saw the quote of Angela by Elizabeth, where does he dwell, or did he dwell, if not in pain or suffering? Où donc habitait-il, sinon dans la douleur? And I said, I've read some stuff from, Angela Foligno, And I can't find that quote. I'd like to see it in Italian or something, you know. And it took my buying the French edition of the Book of the Apparitions to find the quote. And I found it. Where does he live, or where did he live in this version, if not in suffering, pain, douleur? That's where I want to live, oh my mother, my priest. She's addressing Mother Germaine, calls her pontiff in another place, in order to lift up real high the cross of my Savior. Lift high the cross, that hymn. And so Elizabeth, you know, has that. I'm going to have to find my picture of the cross at her convent now in Flavignejo. It's not difficult to find my pilgrimage. This is the cross they have in the chapel at Flavignejo. And is exactly what her poem says, to lift high the cross. I guess I can show you another angle of this. That would be the chapel of Flavignejo. So again, what I read was to rise above these contingencies. It opened up a hole, just like Mother Germaine had, or maybe Geneviève, another nun, said that a big window was open for her when she read this from Angela of Foligno. In pain is where God is going to be found, where you are really poor. I belong to a group that's very humble, people that struggle quite a bit with very menial jobs, a lot of them, I'm sure. They are so happy to get to that Wednesday night celebration that we have every Wednesday. And reminded me of the Dominican Republic. Saturday night, 6 p.m., 7 p.m., I would teach catechism, and all these young people, including attractive, young ladies and others. And I questioned, I said, Saturday night catechism, Well, the alternative were the sinful discos, which also cost money to even get there by a bus or something. That was not taken for granted. But at the same time, when they got home at 8 o'clock, the lights were out. They put out the candles or the kerosene lamps. So my catechism was a entertainment. The poor are preached the good news. Now, getting back to Simone Weil, I didn't want to take too long, but I knew it was probably going to take a little bit of time. Simone Weil was from a Jewish family, non-practicing, incredibly good people. Her brother became a brilliant, world-renowned mathematician. Simone was number one in the École Normale. She was the best philosophy student. She beat out Simone de Beauvoir, number two, Jean-Paul Sartre's, companion or wife. And Simone was driven to perfect herself. She was jealous of Jesus because he got crucified. She went to try to fight in the Spanish Civil War. There's a carnet here somewhere. This one, France combattant. A pass. What do they call it? Laissez-passer. Some sort of permit to cross boundaries, etc. She died at the age of 34. She was born 1909. She died in 1940. I'd have to see. Let me check her dates again. At the age of 34, Bernadette died at 35, but Simone's official death certificate lists voluntary starvation. She didn't eat enough, picky about the food in this hospital in England. And some people defend that it wasn't suicide, but the doctor's certificate that says suicide. By the way, as I've said in some videos, Thérèse of Lisieux, in her terribly painful illness that lasted about a year and a half, just like Élisabeth of the Trinity's apparently lasted a year and a half, she said, don't leave poisons around because there is this temptation of suicide. Élisabeth of the Trinity told her prioress, are you leaving me alone? Because I'm paraphrasing, I'm tempted to jump out the window. And then she says, no, but a Carmelite is not supposed to die that way. So I say even someone like Élisabeth of the Trinity, very holy, aspires to the Carmelite ideal. It's not, I can't die that way, but a Carmelite doesn't die that way. Simone, brilliant philosopher, teacher, strict, wanted to learn what suffering was, what working in a factory was. She sort of punished herself. And she wouldn't even allow anyone to touch her. So, and she learned all kinds of languages. I mean, Sanskrit and Akkadian, and she was a genius. And I think she had an apparition of Jesus. And she got in contact with, I guess, Father Perrin is the way you pronounce it, a Dominican. And she refused to join the Catholic Church officially because she wanted to preserve her intellectual independence and not be subject to dogmatic restrictions. There's some information that in the hospital as she was dying, someone baptized her, and that Simone was aware of it and did not protest, but she had refused to be baptized previously. She's an incredible light. Camus, I think it was said, this is the purest spirit of our time. So I have a deep love for Simone Weil. Here's a modern one. She was an incredible person, as was Anne Frank, by the way. I'm still reading the diary of Anne Frank on this Shabbat Shalom day, Friday. And I consider Simone Weil one of my 4 saintly French young women friends who I believe I have this friendship with. Let's see what, by serendipity, what we find in Simone Weil quotes. Oh, there's a whole bunch of them. She's very profound. I've read her books. I've read her books. And one of the things I most remember is that she says when God created, he sort of inconvenienced himself by sharing his existence with us, having to put up with us. which is something that I guess a lot of us can relate to, especially those of us that live alone and don't like our orderly life. Um, this is a good one. This is a good one. And so I'm just sharing that she's a lovable, lovable saint. And this is an interesting quote. I'd never seen this before. The intelligent man who is proud of his intelligence is like the condemned man who is proud of his large cell. Reminds me of Nehru, who was always concerned about his cell. He spent a lot of time in jail in India. So anyway, 4 Italians that I am very devoted to, with one hovering high above the others, Catherine of Siena, and 4 French women who I am highly, highly devoted to, and one in a different category because she was the least and the one most favored with this extraordinary event or series of events, um, the vision of the Virgin Mary at Lourdes and the cures. This is a very good one. Attention is the rarest and purest, speaking of pure, form of generosity. You know, when you are with young, humble people, um, you realize that you have to be on your best behavior. You can't be rough. You can't be rude. They get that in their workplaces and on the street and everything. Many of these friends of mine would be instantly recognizable as those people we don't want invading the border. These Catholic guys, I knew this holy man at some church saying, keep them out, keep them out. Vote against, locally. He was mayor of the town that I live in. Christ in the Blessed Sacrament, and in the poor, forget about it. I was hungry, you gave me to eat. Oh, that's BS. The checklist is abortion. So I'm getting a little polemical. But the interesting thing is this, paying attention is the rarest and purest form of generosity. And she, with her mind, of course, could have been bored to tears, perhaps listening to a factory colleague working, especially since she was not a very good manual worker. She tried farming too, and tried to be. And one of the things I learned from her, or at least buttressed, the importance that every human being be given the chance to know. I have a doctorate in theology. I'm in a group where I'm probably a resource, an asset. I've been to very good schools. Some of my friends have not gotten past several grades of school. And the teachers they've had are probably simple people too. And I am really happy to be with them. I don't see it as some sort of condescension. I see it as where God has placed me as a loving presence, where I learn from them probably more than they learn from me. I went to the Dominican Republic as a missionary for, a couple of weeks in the early 80s, and I thought that our group, Amor en Acción, Love in Action from Miami, got received more from the experience of going there and seeing how really poor people in cardboard houses. This is after a hurricane that took place like in 1980 or something. And I've seen people in cardboard houses that don't eat every day. and several days can go by, and they can make a tea from leaves that have been used and reused to put in the baby bottle for their child. When you get into contact with that, you learn more about all the stuff that I was just talking about. And so I'm not going to make it to 50 minutes. I'll stop right there.